welcome to Two Boomer Women. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. I've been talking with Boomer women for almost a decade now. Well, I guess I've been talking to Boomer women all my adult life. Reinventing myself several times along the way, though, but always focused on us, Boomer women. With this incarnation of Two Boomer Women, I'll be interviewing other women who have a message of interest for our demographic. If you want to hear about or learn about something specific, let me know and I'll find someone who understands us to talk about it. There's a contact page at twoboomerwomen.com. If you want to be a guest on Two Boomer Women, bring it on. There's an application form at the website too. Finally, this show is all about conversation. We women know its value. We know how to do it, and we must perpetuate the art form. So let's get started with today's show. Welcome to the Two Boomer Women podcast. I'm your host, Agnes Knowles. I met today's guest several years ago online when she and a colleague hosted a link-up party. Now, before you start imagining all sorts of outrageous things, let me explain that in this case, a link-up was a way for a collection of bloggers to support each other. We all focused on midlife subjects, so it was easy to connect with and promote each other. In prepping for this chat today, I realized that other than commenting on and sharing each other's blog posts, I don't think we've ever really talked. Through her writing, though, I felt I knew Leanne, and then coincidentally, she made a major decision about her life that I had made a few years earlier. Leanne Cras, all the way from Australia, welcome to the Two Boomer Women podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited and looking forward to what we're going to chat about today.
Yeah, no, I'm excited too. I've had one other guest from Australia, so I'd already done the time zone shuffle, the time zone puzzle, shall we say. But let's review this. This episode is actually airing Wednesday morning here in BC, Canada. Right now, we're recording at 6 p.m. on Wednesday here in Canada. What time is it for you?
It's 9 o'clock Wednesday morning. So we're half a day ahead of you, a night ahead of you. Yeah, it interests me because I was thinking if there's ever a zombie apocalypse or the end of the world, it'll happen in Australia before it happens to you guys. So you sort of got, a heads up on us. So it's all good.
Oh, okay. It's funny because I'm sort of semi-aware of it. My son did live in New Zealand for several years. So I knew you were ahead of us, but I do need to admit my geographical ignorance. When I was converting the time zones, I didn't realize that you had multiple time zones in Australia.
Yeah, I'm in Western Australia and we're on our time zone. Then on the East Coast, they're 2 hours ahead of us. But then in amongst that, they throw in daylight savings, but not all of Australia uses daylight savings. So at any given time, someone can be 3 hours ahead, 2 hours ahead, 1 hour ahead. So it's all over the shop and people complain about it all the time and you just get on with it because I don't like daylight savings. So I'm happy that we don't have it and it's all good.
Oh, we have the same thing on the west coast of Canada here. But because we are so tied in with the U.S., we're sort of waiting for the west coast of the U.S. to decide not to have daylight savings, and we'll do the same. And I'm of the mind, just deal with the time change. I don't care which one they settle on, but let's just have the same time all year round so my dog adjusts. Dear. Yeah, and just the geography lesson, I live on a big island. Australia is an island of sorts, but obviously more continent-like than mine. I did actually flash up a world map when I was going back and forth, and I didn't realize it, but Australia at its widest point is almost as wide of like all of South America at its widest point. So I think it was like an 800-kilometer difference, which isn't much.
And there's not a lot in between. We've got a big desert bit in the middle, so it's kind of like we're all coastal. So, yeah, it's different.
Yeah. I think that's one of the romances for us North American people because everybody wants to go to Australia up here. So, I'm just going to say this once, too much Crocodile Dundee. But anyways, thank you so much for accommodating our talk today. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
Okay, we're going to jump in and talk about this major decision that both of us have made, albeit at different times, but for the same reason. I think the primary difference between you and me is that I'm single, so I didn't need to consult with anyone prior to, whereas you're married, so probably had more than a few discussions with your husband first. Tell us, if you don't mind, about your decision made in February 2019.
Oh, okay. I blog about it a lot, but basically what happened was a few years before that, I was approached by a lady that I knew socially, who was the wife and practice manager of a surgeon. And she headhunted me and offered me this amazing job. And it was an amazing job. It was excellent pay, fantastic hours. I job shared it with another girl who I just got on really well with. It was like God had handed me this job for the next 10 years until I retired, and it's going to be beautiful. But what I didn't know was that under the shiny veneer of this lady and her husband was this toxic marital mess with this insane jealousy. And it wasn't me that she was jealous of. I was kind of like became her best friend, and she just poured everything onto me. So there was screaming, there was raging, there was fighting behind closed doors in his office. It was a nightmare. And I wanted that job so badly. I wanted to keep it so badly that I did a lot to try and figure out ways to keep that job, like talked it out with her, did all this stuff. And things would improve for 5 minutes, a week, a month, and then it would just go back to what it was. And eventually the crunch came, and yeah, that's where the story starts. So,
and you pulled the plug.
I pulled the plug.
If you don't mind, I'm going to ask you what sort of discussions you and your husband had prior to arriving at your decision. The obvious ones are probably maybe household income and obviously your happiness. Were there any other things you considered as well?
We talked a lot about it. My husband's actually, he went back. He has quite a diverse employment history. So he's stopped and started a lot of jobs. He, in his 50s, took a redundancy and then went back to study full-time and became a family counsellor. So we kind of, part of the whole thing with this job is I've always worked because he's fluctuated so much. Like I've been the person who's been the backup plan all the way through. But because he's a counsellor, he's a really good listener. And so I'd come home from this job and I would just be dumping all this stuff on him. So it was no surprise to him that I was starting to, fall apart. But what we had to look at was whether or not, like, it had just become so much a part of my life. It was overflowing into our home. It was too much. And so he knew that something had to be done. And so really we just had to sit down and have a few serious conversations about finances mainly, but also how finances play out against your wife who's having a minor nervous breakdown. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting too how, it's a double-edged sword in some ways, or I'm sure it was a double-edged sword in some ways for you, because not only are you dealing with this dreadful workday, you bring it home, you have to unload it, you have to spill your guts, so to speak. But then I'm sure you're sort of going like, oh my God, I can't believe it. 60% of the conversation with my husband is me dumping on him about my job, so there's added stress for you there too.
Yeah.
So were you both on the same page then for most of the time?
I think by the time it got to the point it got to, he knew. To take it back a step, the person who's probably the best financial person in our house is me. He's very casual about things. He's kind of like, it'll be fine. And I'm very much like, we need to have the rainy day account and we need to have this and we need to have that. So I think that by the time we got to this point, I wasn't expecting to retire when I stopped. So it was kind of like, can we survive for a few months if I leave this job before and I don't find another job for a few months? And that was kind of the initial conversation where we started. So we were both on the same page. It was kind of like, yeah, we can do this. It's much better for, and I think he was sort of saying, you can't keep doing what you're doing, no matter how great the job itself is, you can't do this and survive. I was crying. I would get to the point of Monday morning or Sunday night and I'd start thinking about going to work and I'd start weeping. Not, full-blown crying, just that weeping. And I thought, no. So we were always very much on the same page, but not thinking about retirement at that point.
Well, it's interesting remembering, or reading your blog posts and realizing that, I think that was the beginning plan of just get us through a few months and then I'll find something else, that sort of thing. And then, then it ended up being a retirement of sorts. That's great. You pulled the plug in February 2019. And I know that a toxic work environment can eat at you inside. It just gnaws and it gnaws and it festers. How long did it take you to feel healthy and whole and happy again?
I think at least a lot longer than I expected. I'm normally a very resilient, very upbeat, very practical firstborn child, onward and upward. It surprised me how much it had taken away from me and how long it took me to actually find me again afterwards. So I reckon probably 6 months to feel like I wasn't talking about it all the time, worrying about it all the time, churning over it all the time, worrying about what's next. There was a lot of what's next going on in my head for a long time. And probably 12 months until I had settled into the idea that I probably wouldn't go back to work. So it was a much longer process than what I would have ever have thought.
A good thing to sort of understand from somebody who's been there, I think, because oftentimes I think people sort of think, I'm just going to get out of here. I've got to get out of here now. I'll find another job within a couple of weeks and I'll be fine.
I still have triggers now. I saw something the other day with somebody with the name that was the same as this woman, and my heart started beating faster. So it was just, wow. I just noticed that just occasionally now, but not like it used to be, but it's almost like a little bit of PTSD out of it. It lingers.
Wow. Yeah, pretty scary. And I guess that sort of leads into my next question, a personal question again, and I appreciate you being so upfront about everything. Did you ever have little panic moments about the decision, like not about the her or the name or anything, but about the decision, say in that first year?
Oh, definitely. I'm an overthinker. I have a T-shirt that says probably overthinking everything. I wear that a lot because I do. I think, and I have a plan A. My husband laughs. He says, you've got a plan B, you've got a plan F, you've got a plan. And I did. I thought, what have I done? Because I knew I would never get a job that paid what that job paid. And also when I left, the woman herself, she wasn't a bad person. She was just in a very messy place in her life that overflowed. And she was saying to me, just go and take some time and, if it all works out, you can come back and all that sort of thing. So I was throwing all of that around and thinking, should I go back? Should I not go back? Should I look for another job? What if I can't get another job? And then, of course, COVID hit in the middle of all of this because I was just coming out of the whole tunnel of it and it was COVID. But in the early stages, my husband, the counsellor, did a really good little exercise with me. He has a set of cards that are values cards, and they have anything like love, courage, kindness, adventure, all these different, things. And I did this process where you basically whittle those cards down until you end up with the top 6 values that resonate the most with you. And I said to him, well, what does that do? And he said, well, what you do is you take the top 3 and when you ask yourself a question, you say, can I apply those 3 things and feel good about it? So like when my top 3 ended up being freedom, flexibility, and I think courage, or authenticity. And it was like, could you go back to work and have freedom and flexibility and feel like you're your authentic self? No. No. So that helped me a lot to try and when I start overthinking it, to go, does this work? So.
My first thought is that when we're done recording, please stay on the line because we have like 37,000 things that we have in common. Yeah, it's just so interesting. It's interesting how it does eat into every part of your life. But what a great exercise. And
It was.
do you know if that sort of thing is available online? I'm just wondering.
Yes, it is.
Does your husband have a website?
And I wrote a
too?
blog post on it. So when they look at my blog later, and
we're going to link anyways.
Yeah, and there's also a search bar on my blog, and you can type in values, and it would bring it up. And I've got a link in there to one that I found online that had a similar sort of list, So
great.
Yeah, it was surprisingly helpful.
Okay, quick word to the listeners. You should pay attention to the rest of the podcast before you go clicking links. People are going to go clicking now right away. Okay, so knowing that your husband was so supportive, I'm going to dig a little deeper if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The unhappiness, the frustration with disliking your work environment is not unusual for midlife women. Many of them dream of dumping that 9 to 5. Did you have to make any major lifestyle changes when you did quit?
No, but we were in a very good position because I'm very good. I have Scottish background. My husband says that's where the frugalness comes into my personality. I've got a girlfriend and she has a Jewish background, and she says it's her Jewish background that makes her frugal.
Okay.
But we've never had lots of money. We've never both had great, fantastic paying jobs or anything like that. So we've always lived within our means. We've always been good savers. And my biggest aim all through the early days of being married was to pay our mortgage off. So we basically, when all this was happening, I was 57, he was 58, and we were debt free. That made a really big difference. So we weren't looking for several $100s a month to pay off a mortgage with, or a car loan, or our credit cards, anything like that. So that put us very much into a good position. Mind you, we were still thinking, a 6-month time frame, not a indefinite time frame. We also had some savings, and our children were both off our hands, married and in good jobs. So we didn't have any financial drain. And I think if you were working as a single woman, or in a marriage where you still had a mortgage or kids at home, or you were people like, I know I have family members who are big spenders. And if you're a big spender, it's very hard suddenly when you live week to week with your pay, that, your money comes in and you spend it. If you haven't got a backup, then you'd have to really think twice. But we evaluated all of that, and we knew we were in a good position to be able to pull back a little bit. But there was still another 10 years of working life I had in front of me that I thought I had, that was going to build into our retirement funds and our superannuation and, all of that I had to take into consideration.
Yeah, really interesting. Just even this morning I was looking at some statistical numbers about cost of living and how much you need to live in retirement and stuff like that, and how much you need in your retirement savings plans. Yeah. And I'm going like, holy crikey, who did they interview for this information?
But that's because a lot of people want to have the same or a better lifestyle than what they have currently. So we have in Australia, our government has an online calculator that you can actually put some figures into and see what that pans out as an annual income going into forever. And that sort of thing is really, really helpful. So I think if you sort of Google around, you can find things like that. But you can't live on fresh air. You have to have,
Yeah. I've actually created something myself within my business. It's called an income outgone analyzer. And, so it's a Excel spreadsheet with the numbers all auto-populate and transfer.
Very helpful, very reassuring to have something like that, so that you're making a logical decision, not just an instant circumstance-driven decision,
Well, and also I think I call it spending the same paycheck twice. Where you think, I've got this much money coming in, so I could do this. And the next day you sort of think, that money's coming in. I can do that, and suddenly you've spent that same amount of money 2-3 times and something's got to give.
Yeah.
So I think maybe, I don't know if you've answered this or not, but I'll ask it anyways, about the conversations you had with yourself. And what would you recommend midlife women think about if getting gone from the workplace is really eating at them?
I think it depends. If they're planning on just changing jobs, that's not such a big deal. except that you've also got to realise this is a really ageist thing to say, but changing jobs after you're 50 is a lot harder than changing jobs when you're 20 or 30 or 35. I actually swapped from being in the dental side of professions into a medical side of professions when I was 52, and I realised then when I was going for jobs that I was up against a much wider field than, when you're in your 30s. So you've sort of got to keep that in mind as well, that you may not just, like if you were 35, you could quit a job and maybe walk into another one tomorrow. Nowadays, when you're getting into your 50s and 60s, it's harder. Employers look at you and think, oh, she's, blah, 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 especially in a face-to-face position where you're, like I did a lot of reception work, and you're not as attractive as the 30-year-old false eyelashed, beautiful hair, Botoxed cheekbones or whatever.
I call bullshit on that one.
I did too, but it is.
Yeah, but I'm just looking at you and saying.
Yeah. I didn't think there was either, but when you go in to see who you're interviewing against, it's, but when it comes to something like retirement, I think the biggest thing is to look at how much of yourself is tied into what you do. So, the question, a lot of people say, you meet somebody and they go, oh, what do you do? Or when you're filling out a form and you write, oh, I'm a dental therapist, or I'm a receptionist, or I'm a business manager, or I'm whatever. And now I'm having to write retired. And the first time I did that, it was like, oh, I'm old. It changes your view of who you are. And people used to say, you could say, what do you do? And you might say, well, I was a dental hygienist. Oh, that's really interesting. I've got this tooth, blah, 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 and the conversation goes on. Now, people go, what do you do? You go, oh, I don't work anymore. And it's kind of like, oh, that's nice. Next, move on to the next person, because it redefines you. So you sort of got to have a process of redefining yourself as you are going to leave, and also how you're going to fill your time. Because I'm very good at puttering. I'm very good at having a few little interests and having some quiet time. But I've got other friends who are retired who pack every moment of their day with stuff to do because they can't do nothing. They don't sit. They probably tie their self-image into their productivity still a little bit, and there is a big element of that that works underneath as to how we see ourselves and what retirement does to that picture of ourselves.
Yeah, and maybe something good to practice prior to that, just in terms of, and I know on those forms they don't have happy involved grandma as an option. Whereas, for a lot of, well, we're talking women here, but for a lot of women, being a happy involved grandma is what they want. Yeah. Or volunteering, or, like all those sort of things. Yeah. But as you say, so many people define themselves and get defined, I think, both ways by the job. Yeah. And so, yeah, good thought there.
And the other thing might be too that you don't have to necessarily, unless your job has got to the point where you can't handle it, that you can devolve it down. Like I remember you said that you took quite a bit of leave, and I've got a girlfriend who works for government. She took all her sick leave as stress leave. Her doctor wrote her a medical certificate, and she took several months. She had a long-term employment. Took several months off on stress leave to get to see whether she could go back or not. You can, like I actually was working more days a week, and I managed to negotiate with the woman I shared the job with about me working less days and her working more, because she was less impacted by what was going on. So before you actually pull the pin, I think sometimes it's good to see if there are ways to make it work.
Right. Yeah. Just one other side thought there is, because I'm at an age where many of my friends are retired, and I've mentioned this a few times in different interviews, but all the women I know that were retiring about the same time as their husbands, all of them said, you go ahead and retire, honey, and 6 months to a year from now, I'll retire. But they wanted their husbands to find another life, busy stuff doing, before the woman came home. And, because most people can't spend 24/7 together.
Yeah, definitely.
So some of our listeners are probably really loving the idea of following in our footsteps. I'm trying to remember some of your writing about this time of your life. if a person really wants, really needs to quit a job, but absolutely needs income, you'd mentioned it took you a long time to heal from a toxic workplace, but I know it's not your lived experience. In your opinion, though, do you think a person can successfully leave a long-term position in a dreadful environment and promptly perform well in a new workplace? Sorry, as I said, I know you didn't have to do that. But.
It is actually still quite valid to me, because I truly, truly believed that I would walk away from that place. I would give it 2 weeks and I would start, and what I had actually done is, just weeks before I actually left, I applied for a position with another medical specialist, and he was keen enough to get me that I was actually away, and he waited for me to get back to have the interview. And I went into the interview. I was thinking, this is my escape hatch, off I go. And when I mentioned about triggers, the interview, the things that he was saying, there was all these things going off in my head, in the back of my head, and I started almost self-sabotaging the interview, because he said things like, I'm really looking forward to my wife becoming part of the practice in the next, short time. Our child's growing up now, and and she can become part of it. She really wants to get involved, and I could just hear these warning bells going on. I'm thinking, no. And he was, there were different things that he was saying that I could hear from when I'd got drawn into this other job that were the same. And I felt like I had lost my trust in what people said about jobs. So in the end, I went home, and all the way home I was thinking about it. I got home probably 2 hours after I got home. I sent him an email and withdrew my application, because I was just not in the headspace to be able to handle a similar thing happening to me again. And so then I progressed with my job and then ended up walking out a few weeks later. But after that, I then applied for probably 2 or 3 jobs over the next month or 2 months. And when I didn't get to an interview stage, instead of being disappointed, I was relieved. I just think, I was reading into them, like the things, where when you really want a job and you're really keen, you read stuff and you think, oh yeah, I can do that. And so like if you're looking for a part-time job, it'll say like, will involve some sick relief for other team members, or you may need to work full-time when the other team members on holidays. And I would just extrapolate that out and think, no, this means that I'm not going to be part-time. I'm going to be filling in all the time, or I'm going to be, and it's kind of like, it just took a long time for me to be able to think to myself, yes, I could do this again. So yeah, some people, I think, if you were desperate, if I was really desperate for the money, I'd ignore all that and just jump in again and hope for the best. But it really messed with my head. Really messed with me.
Yeah, and what's come through, I think, the whole time we've been talking is just that need to listen to your gut.
Yeah. And to give yourself space and to stop expecting yourself to be Superwoman, just to allow yourself the grace to say, I've had this really traumatic event in my life. It may not look traumatic on the outside to other people because I've kept a lid on it, and I didn't want to embarrass this woman either, because what she was going through in her own way was a very traumatic experience for her, and she just didn't handle it well and poured it out all over me. But we live in a smallish community, and they are, he's a surgeon, and you don't want to be bad-mouthing people. So you can't, there were only a few people I could talk to about it. So, yeah, it took a long time to get it out of my head.
Yeah. And this is going to sound strange coming from me, but it sounds like really great that you had your husband, and, and how fortuitous that he had just become, or recently become, a counselor, and didn't try to do the, oh, Leanne, I can fix you. It sounded like he was the good counselor who listened, and then came up with, like the cards and the values and things like that, so that you basically were making your own decision.
Yeah, but he actually said to me at one point, you can't keep coming home and just spewing this all over me, and then about, I don't know, a little bit later on that day, he said to me, no, I was wrong to say that to you because you've got nowhere else to let it out. So, you know, and he had the training to be able to, and he's the type of person that he doesn't internalize stuff. Women personalize a lot of stuff. He could let it roll over him and out. I think he was sort of saying our conversation needs to be bigger than just this woman and her craziness, you know, and the stories that I would come home with, you know. And the other woman and I, it was really good. I was job sharing too, because we bounced a lot of stuff off each other and we laughed about some of it because you had to laugh. It was crazy town and, you know, but sad crazy town. So
you didn't ever felt the need to move to a really big city so you could spew your guts and nobody know who you're talking about?
Just go out there and say, oh, this crazy woman I work for, and people go, oh, yes, I know her. And you think, no.
Yeah, right. The names have been changed to protect the guilty. A little interjection here based on my own experience. I loved my job, and it was a new boss who created the toxicity in my workplace. And I stayed for about a year. I took a 6-month leave of absence just to decide, you know, it was incomeless, shall we say, to make sure it was the right decision.
Yeah.
And then I went back in and officially quit. Now, I use the air quotes around this next word, but the woman in HR said, why don't you retire? And this is where the air quotes come in. And by using that word retirement, I was able to access a small pension that I had paid into. Now, not very much money. I used to joke that I'd been there long enough to about earn maybe 2 bottles of wine a month in my pension. As it turned out, I also got extended medical and dental out of it. So, you know, if that small pension alone only paid for extended medical and dental, I figured I'm only getting older. I'm only going to need those things more. So that might be something else that, you know, like if someone's listening and thinking, I really want to do that, check into that option. You know, if you've been paying into any sort of a pension plan, maybe you could do that. Is there anything that stands out about your decision-making process or the actual quitting or the recuperation afterwards that we haven't talked about? Sort of any tips for the listeners?
I think the biggest thing you would need to think about is to actually sit down if you've got a partner or by yourself if you haven't, and actually have a really serious look at what your financial situation is. And you know, there's no point quitting something and finding that you're under a bridge eating cat food because you can't afford your mortgage. You know, you've got to weigh that up. What I hadn't realised is we were more financially stable than what I had given us credit for. I tend to work a little bit from a scarcity mindset, which is something that I've been working on in myself, because we've had such an erratic income over the years. I tend to always think we have less than what we have. So a little side note was that probably a few months before I quit the job, we had a person that we met who was a financial planner, and he offered to come and give us a, air quotes, free consultation, which turned into being a $2,000 consultation by the end of it all, which, you know,
oh my goodness.
I know, be very wary. But he was very big on, you know, work for another, you know, put as much work into the next 10 years as you can, build your, you know, retirement fund, build your, you know, what we call it superannuation in Australia. I think that's 4K in the US or something, or, you know, your pension fund. Build that up, liquidate this asset, put it into here, do this. And what basically he shot himself in the foot, because what it did was it made me see he had sort of like made us actually sit down and work out everything we owned, you know, like the little things we had tucked away for a rainy day, what was in our retirement fund, what was here, what was there. And it actually woke me up to the fact that we're not poor, you know, we're actually okay. And I could actually stop work and we're not going to be, you know, eating hungry 2-minute noodles for the rest of our life. But it was an expensive way to do it, but we needed to do that exercise, to sit down and work out where we were financially and what we expected our future financial needs to be, whether we could live within our means. You know, there would be no point saying, oh, we've got this money in the bank, let's do a big trip to Europe, because then we've got nothing to pay the bills with. And the other thing that I did learn is that there are two different types of financial planners. There's a financial planner and a retirement planner. And if I'd known about retirement planners and I had a bit of spare money, maybe that would have been a good conversation to have, because they're looking more to how do you want to live your retirement? What do you need to be able to do that, as opposed to how can we make you more money? And I wasn't about how can I make more money. It was how can I afford a change of lifestyle. And and accessing, there's some online tools I'm sure that you can use, like their spreadsheety type thing. I've never really run a budget because I've always just worked out this is how much we have. We need to live under that line, Yeah. But to do that sort of budgeting and to know that you're not setting yourself up for failure.
Well, interesting too, as you're talking, I'm thinking, boy, if there's anybody younger listening, really take a page out of your book and, live within your means. Try to put some money away.
Definitely,
if you've got a mortgage, get it paid down as quickly as you, cars, whatever.
Yeah.
And live within your means. I think it's just so easy to get.
Yeah.
Credit card.
We have a credit card, and my thing with that credit card, our whole life has been that you pay it off at the end of each month. You don't carry debt across the months. You don't take out, loans for things that, like if you really want something, save up and buy it. It's the pressure.
That mentality
started
dying, I think, in the 70s.
Yeah.
We have MasterCard,
in
whatever,
Australia,
Chargex.
There's a guy in Australia who he's a financial advisor. He wrote a book he calls himself The Barefoot Investor. And he does just financial advice. He has a column in our newspaper. And his book is the best-selling book in Australia, has been for the last couple of years.
Oh, wow.
And it is I've never bought it because I've thought, why would you need somebody to tell you live within your means, pay off your credit cards, save money, have a rainy day account if something goes wrong? But the majority of people don't have that. So it's definitely something that you have to know your finances before you go and take a big plunge.
Yeah. Just a quick aside is one of the first interviews I did this calendar year was with a financial planner who specializes in retirement planning.
Yeah, I watched that. I listened to that. Yeah.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay. Yeah. So, some really good advice and a good thing for you to mention insofar as depending on what stage of life you're at is make sure you get the right sort of planner, advisor. So you've continued on with your blogging.
Yeah.
And your support of women at midlife. Where do people find you?
Okay. Well, mainly, and I think you're going to pop some links in as well. So I might send you a few links to a couple of my posts that might be helpful to people if they're interested in having a look at my process. I write a blog called Cresting the Hill, which when I first started it was kind of that thing of, launching into your 50s and you're sort of feeling at a bit of a loss and who am I and what am I? And it was kind of my way to work my way through that. It connected me to a lovely people like you, Agnes, a lovely group of very positive women who are in their 50s and now going into their 60s. But what it's given me all the way through is somewhere to write my thoughts down, get my thought process in some sort of order, and to kind of flesh out what I'm trying to get at in my head as it's all churning around, So when all this stuff hit the fan, it was a great place to write that down. So it's crestingthehill.com.au because I'm Australian, so I left the .au on the end. And I have like a little menu across the top of it and early retirements on that menu. You can click on that and there's several dozen posts on what I've done. Or even just in my archives from 2019, you can click on that and there's what I've been writing. But I actually went back and looked at a few of them and I can see I definitely at the beginning was planning on returning to work.
And that's what I remember, yeah.
Yeah. So it's been an evolving process. It wasn't kind of like, throw my, papers in the air and walk out the door and skip down the road to happily ever after. It's been a process. And I think where the blog's been good is it's almost like a little bit of a diary of my process, So,
right. Yeah. And I was actually just going to say that too, insofar as, for anybody who's sort of thinking that they need to pull the plug sooner than later, even if it's a year or two up the road. If they don't want to start a blog, but even just that journaling
Yeah,
to help clear a bit of the cobwebs and get it out. And you go back and read it and sort of sorts through a few things, or you see a few trends, or, whatever. It's, so it's a good point there. Okay, so we'll put the link to your website. If you send me a few on specific articles, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Now, I've checked out your newest offerings, and I'm going to ask you, what is Cultivating Wholehearted Living? Okay. This sounds just right up your alley.
Well, that's based on the idea of instead of having New Year's resolutions, you pick a word of the year and you just have one word that's kind of your theme. One of my other blogging friends, she's chosen bold for this year, and she's blogging about how she's making bolder choices and just being braver and stuff. And I've really enjoyed hers. And
you've done that word of the year for a couple of years now then.
Several years, yes. I've had, I think, about 5. And I like it because I'm not a New Year's resolution person. Yeah, no. I think you set yourself up for failure. But if you pick a word that kind of appeals to you, it kind of just gives you another thing, a bit like the journal, that you can go back to every now and then and think, oh, yeah. And this year I chose cultivate because I thought I'm sort of I've moved past the resurrect myself stage, but it's kind of like, okay, now what am I going to do with what lies ahead? What do I want to develop in myself over this year and into the future, where I can become more real, more wholehearted, kinder, being able to offer grace to people, know who I am, all that sort of stuff. And it's kind of like the garden, your garden doesn't grow if you just let it run wild. You sort of got to nourish the things that you want to flourish, and kind of weed out the stuff that you don't need anymore or want anymore. And so I thought that kind of is what I'm heading to. And I've had several guests. Once a month I've had somebody write a post about something that they're cultivating at the time being. And what's interesting is this week's post is actually from a girl who has been writing about trying to cultivate a sense of belonging, because she said since she retired 7 years ago, she realised that all of her friends were work friends, and she's really struggled over these last several years to create new friendships and a new tribe, of people she's close to, and she's still struggling with it. And I totally get that. And it's really resonated. There's been several comments that people have made to say how that's something they've struggled with too, which is another thing to think about.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was my first thought when you said that. I like your garden analogy too, because you're not going to plant something in the garden that you don't want to eat. You plant the things that you really do want to eat in your own garden. Yeah, so same sort of thing. Is there anything on the radar for you right now as we try to put COVID behind us?
Well, yeah, COVID's been a really interesting thing in Australia, because specifically in Western Australia, we've had almost no cases. Our Premier, he shuts our borders. We're an island, as you said at the very beginning, and then Western Australia is almost like, because of the desert in the middle, we're cut off from the eastern side, which is the more populous side of Australia. So we're almost this little bubble, and we've had, I think the total is 9 deaths from COVID in Western Australia. That's it, total. And most of those all of those have been returned travellers in the very early days, or, seamen who've come in on a freight ship or something like that. There hasn't been, I don't believe we've had a community death. We've had virtually hardly any community transfer of it. So we're almost living in this bubble. So other than at the beginning when we all locked down and the world stopped, we've been able to resume life again. And I think what I'm really have on my radar at the time being is a little bit with what Leslie wrote in the post on Monday, is re-establishing contact with real people. So I have a very diverse and interesting online life, during COVID there were 6 of us that were Zooming once a week, of my fellow bloggers, and it was a great group. The 5 of them are still going strong. They love it, but I just realised that no, this is becoming my life, where I think I've had social interaction when I've been sitting in my pajamas at home all day, and So kind of now that everything's back and going, I make sure that I'm volunteering once a week. I've joined a discussion group at my church to, with some ladies that are completely different to me to be more diverse. And I've also started just doing a little bit more creative stuff, I'm not an arty person. I'm not a crafty person. I actually wrote a blog post once called I'm the anti-craft, because church groups always have these like ladies craft groups, and I'm so bad at all that sort of stuff. But I'm just discovering now that there are things that I like to do that are a little bit arty, I've started doing some collaging, and I've started doing a bit of calligraphy, and I'm sort of trying to use the right side of my brain more than the left side of my brain. And yeah, so it's been, I cannot say how much I love my life now compared to what it was a couple of years ago. I do. Every morning I wake up and I smile. I just love it. So.
And if that isn't proof positive that you made the right decision, that's great. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's, you're going to have everybody jumping on the bandwagon, whether they like their workplace or not. It's like, oh, that sounds fabulous. So yeah, finding interests and just finding new interests, whether you pull out the old ones or just find new ones and just experiment with that. That's great. So, well, I'll talk to the listeners for just a moment. I hope you've appreciated today's guest and her sharing her story about ditching a really unpleasant 9-to-5. And I know there's more than a few of you who would like to find a way to do that. If you have comments on today's show, leave them where you listen to podcasts, or you can go to twoboomerwomen.com/join-the-conversation. Feel free to leave stars too. It helps us grow. Leanne, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing so much. I really sort of tried to dig into your personal life there, but sharing so much about your personal journey. I really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. I've had a lovely time. It's been really good. Thank you for having me. So, yeah.
I know, that's great. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you. You too.